Seattle is a lot more than coffee and rainy weather that you can't avoid. Trust me, there's a lot more to Seattle than meets the eye. And if you go to Seattle, it's going to make it a lot more enjoyable if you know all the weird and interesting facts about Seattle. So I looked everywhere on the internet and narrowed it down to 15 interesting facts about Seattle. So with that being said, let's take a look at number 1. The first drawing of Seattle's Space Needle was made on a napkin. The Space Needle is definitely the coolest building in Seattle, but the history of this building is kind of surprising. In 1959, a hotel manager from Seattle named Edward Carlson went to Germany. He was just there for a short while, but while he was there, he saw the Stuttgart Tower, which was a popular tower with a restaurant on top. He was so inspired by the tower that he immediately drew a similar building on a hotel napkin. But just a few short years later, that sketch turned into what we know as the Space Needle today. Now, number 2 on our list may not be a great feat of architecture, but it's definitely interesting. There is a whole wall in Seattle that is full of used gum. The Seattle Times said that this strange attraction started way back in 1991, when people who went to the Market Theater started sticking chewing gum to the brick wall of the theater. And well, I guess over the years, you can say that the wall has stuck around. The gum wall is now a major tourist attraction. It is covered with gum of every color, and some pieces are stuck 20 feet up on the wall. There is an estimated 172,000 pieces of gum on the wall. Okay, I'm getting a little grossed out. Let's move on to number 3. It is said that the world's very first gas station started in Seattle, Washington. Seattle certainly has a special claim to fame when it comes to gas stations. But it's important to note that this distinction is disputed by some, who say that it was actually St. Louis that had the first gas station. Anyway, the story goes that John McClane was in charge of sales for the Standard Oil Company of California, and he was in charge of expansion to the state of Washington. A pipe was built to connect their main storage tank to a 30-gallon galvanized tank on site, and the rest, they say, is history. But gas stations weren't the only first for Washington, and that brings us to number 4. In fact, the first labor strike in the country happened in 1919 in Seattle. In many ways, Seattle has been at the front of many progressive movements. People don't know exactly what caused it to start on February 6, 1919, but what's important is that it set a precedent that workers could have power if they stuck together. Power that many workers still have today. Let's move on to number 5. The official Bad Art Museum is located in Seattle. Now, art is different for everyone. Some people don't like things that a lot of others do. Also, things that are bad for some people can be so bad that they are good for others. And this is exactly what happened in Seattle. So how exactly does it work? Well, basically, people leave bad art outside of their store, or they mail it into them. The best of the bad is the stuff that's hung up, and it's displayed for all the customers to see. Now, if you think that's weird, let's wait till we get to number 6. There's actually a building in Seattle called Darth Vader. This is an all-black angular building at 4th and Blanchard, costing an incredible $33 million to build. And it's called the Darth Vader building because, well, it looks like Darth Vader. It's made up of 2 towers that are joined into a single structure. The shape of the building is said to be meant to minimize its impact on neighboring high-rises, while still giving the tenants that live inside good views. Which, isn't exactly the kind of thing that evil masterminds would come up with. So maybe it's not as Darth Vader-like as a lot of people think. Well, that's it for number 6. Let's take a look at number 7. A whole nother city was built on top of Seattle. It all started on June 6, 1889, in a small woodwork shop, and the fire is now known as the Great Seattle Fire of 1889. In just 18 hours after the fire started, the fire would spread to 100 acres of the waterfront and business district. Buildings, docks, sidewalks, and everything else would catch fire and everything would get destroyed. It was estimated that over $20 million of damages were done. But just within a few days, businesses were back up and running in makeshift tents on their old sites. And instead of moving to a new location, the businesses rebuilt right where they were before. They built a new street that was raised 22 feet, the water system and fire department were updated, and of course, wooden buildings would no longer be allowed. And even still today, you can take an underground tour below Seattle to see where it all started. Let's move right on to number 8. More sunglasses are bought per person in Seattle than any other US city. When you think of Seattle, you usually don't think of sunshine. However, this doesn't stop people in Seattle from buying tons of sunglasses. In fact, people in Seattle can't get enough of shades. People in Seattle buy more sunglasses than any other city on the planet. In fact, they buy about 50% more sunglasses per person than the average person in the United States. Even though this may seem odd, there are several reasons for it. One person online stated that because it's always cloudy, they never have a pair of sunglasses with them when they need them. So when they're out and about, they have to buy a new pair of sunglasses. Another more scientific explanation is the location. Since they are so far north, the sun is lower and it's right in front of their eyes. And this causes a significant need for sunglasses. But maybe they can use those sunglasses to block out number 9. A giant troll lives under one of Seattle's bridges. Well, at least that's what the legend says. And no, we're not talking about Jeff Bezos. The Aurora Bridge in Seattle was built in 1932. And ever since then, people have claimed that they see trolls under it. In 1989, they held art contests to help improve the looks of the area around the bridge. The winning sculpture was a giant troll statue based on the book Billy Goat's Gruff. The statue is 18 feet tall and weighs over 2 tons. And it can be seen crushing a Volkswagen Beetle. It's one of the more unusual places that you'll have to check out if you ever visit Seattle. Well, since we're already talking about bridges, let's move right on to number 10. The longest floating bridge in the world can be found in Seattle. Its approximate length is about 1.4 miles long. And there's not a whole lot else to say about that bridge, so let's just move on to number 11. Real-life superheroes used to watch over Seattle. Some people might be surprised to learn that Seattle really does have a story worthy of a comic book. But these vigilantes didn't drive to work in a Batmobile. Most likely, they probably drove something like a Kia. Still, they call themselves the Rainy City Superhero Movement. While some of them didn't have a lot of combat experience, a couple of them were actually professional MMA fighters. They traveled together and did nightly patrols to try to fight crime, all while dressed in costumes. Even though they were only around from 2011 to 2014, they are said to have stopped several carjackings. They also confronted vandals and walked people to their car at night. Since we're already talking about stopping crime, let's move to number 12. Seattle is the first place where police officers rode bikes. Police don't always drive around in cars. In fact, in some places, a lot of them use different types of transportation. And Seattle was one of the first places to do this. In 1987, Seattle was the first city to implement police officers riding bikes. At first, people laughed at them and told jokes, but now tens of thousands of other departments have all done the same thing. Number 13. When it comes to cities, Seattle is truly one of a kind. But that wasn't the case at first. In fact, when Seattle was first started, it was called New York. The Seattle government says that people started moving to the area in 1851, and when they got there, they started the first town. And the name they chose wasn't exactly original. They literally called it New York. However, a couple years later, when they relocated the city, they named it after an Indian chief, Chief Seattle, and they never looked back. Number 14. In Seattle, there are more cats and dogs than there are children. And just so you know, Seattle is also the city with the most educated and literate people in the country, so maybe there's a correlation between the two. Just kidding. In fact, Seattle is only second to San Francisco in terms of how few children live there. Less than 20% of households in Seattle have kids. Well, maybe it's just because the adults in Seattle act like kids. At least they do when they're watching football, which leads us to number 15. During a famous touchdown run by Marshawn Lynch in the 2011 playoffs, the fans made so much noise that it literally felt like an earthquake. In response to the game-winning touchdown, the crowd generated seismic energy equivalent to an earthquake with a magnitude of between 1 and 3. So that about does it for this video. Which of these facts did you find the most interesting? Put it in the comments below, and until next time, peace.